Good evening. Welcome to Convention of States Indiana Live. Do you think we have a big problem with our federal government? If you do, stay tuned because we at Convention of States have a solution as big as the problem. Our broadcast host is Dale Parrish. He's the Convention of States Indiana State Director. Take it away, Dale.
Well, thank you, Maringo Mike. Thank you for that introduction. And as Maringo Mike said, my name's Dale Parrish. I'm the State Director for Convention of States here in Indiana. And I want to welcome you to our broadcast this evening. Once again, we've got a very special broadcast for you planned out this evening. And I hope you're going to enjoy it. In our discussion section, which is coming up the very first segment, I'm going to bring Paul Phillips on to join me in a discussion. We're going to talk about the President's 2021 budget proposal. Paul is going to give us some history on this, and we'll get into the actual budget proposal itself, and I hope you're going to find it very, very interesting. Now, I might also go ahead and mention that our broadcast coming up on March 9th, we're going to continue this budget proposal topic, and I'll mention what that topic is going to be for the March 9th budget, the March 9th broadcast. I'll mention more about that as we get into the first segment. After the first segment, time permitting, we'll get into giving you some general educational information, some updated numbers on how we're doing here in the state of Indiana. And we'll get into the basics of Convention of States, the three tenets that our movement is based upon. And then beyond that, then we'll try our best to recognize those individuals that have joined us tonight. And I would encourage you to make a comment. Give us comments and questions if you would like on the chat screen there, and we'll do our best to address those. And I'll put them up here on the screen. Keep them short. I'm limited on the number of characters that I can include here, but and then we'll wrap things up for the evening. So again, it's all depends on the amount of time that we have left this evening after we get through this first segment. I know Paul and I sometimes we can talk more than we have time allotted for, but that's okay. That's okay if that happens. Warning, in case your screen would freeze up or go blank, just understand we've encountered technical difficulties. If that occurs, don't hang around. Just make sure you join us again next Monday evening, and because it's just too difficult to get everything up and going again, I don't want you to hang around for that. So just want to try and get that warning in there so everyone can know what is happening should that occur. Okay, like I said, our first segment this evening is going to be a discussion on the President's 2021 budget proposal, and I might as well go ahead and bring Paul up on the screen so that he can. There you go. Hi, Paul.
How are you doing?
Harold? Good. Okay, Paul. Let's get into now. First of all, I want to kind of do a little introduction here. You'll if you've seen one of our broadcasts before, and if you've heard our basics be explained, the basics of Convention of States, one of the problems that we see, of course, in with our federal government is the lack of addressing our national debt and the spending problem that we have in this country. So when I saw the first reports on the President's budget proposal for 2021, what caught my eye was that they were proposing some multi-trillion-dollar reduction in spending over the, I think it was the next 10, 15 years. That really caught my eye. So that's why I wanted to take a look at this and see if we can better understand that, because like I said, reducing spending, controlling spending, addressing the national debt is one of the main abuses that we see in Convention of States with our federal government, and one of the main areas that we want to, of course, see a Convention of States conducted and the Constitution amended to address that particular abuse. So enough said on that. That's why we're doing this tonight. So, okay, Paul. I know, Paul, you've got some good information, I think, on what we're talking about tonight. And I know you wanted to delve a little bit into the history of budgets and the budgeting process. Okay?
Right. So, and if you've read the Constitution, you're probably like me, you realize that Congress actually has all of the power in terms of the purse strings. Article 1 clearly states that bills for raising revenue originate in the House. The Congress has the power to lay taxes, and no money can be drawn from the Treasury, but in consequence of appropriations by law. And the Congress is the only branch of government that's authorized to make laws. So it often kind of puzzled me, well, what's the president doing with preparing a budget and that kind of stuff? And as it turns out, like most of their responsibilities, Congress has delegated a lot of its budget responsibility to the executive branch. And in the case of a budget, this was done in 1921 with the Budget and Accounting Act of 1921. And that act requires the president to submit a budget to Congress by the 1st of March. And as many of you may know, the budget runs from October 1st to September 30th every year. So this budget proposal is for fiscal 2021, which starts on October 1st.
Paul, I know we didn't talk about this, but do you have any sense as to what brought about that act of 1921? Do you know what any of the circumstances that existed at that time where they felt that was necessary to pass that act?
Well, this is just speculation on my part, but just the timing of it is as what I guess I'd call the progressive area really ramped up with our government, with the federal government doing more and more spending and the federal budget growing tremendously. And I believe it just got to a point where it was more than Congress wanted to deal with. And there were enough government agencies, responsibilities delegated to the executive branch that that branch eventually prepared the first proposal for a budget. And that's probably a good point there. This budget is just a proposal. It gets submitted to Congress, and Congress ultimately, well, I won't say ultimately determines the budget. They're supposed to determine the budget, but the general practice as of recently has been simply to issue a series of continuing resolutions saying we can keep spending on whatever we want and expanding debt spending.
Right. Okay. All right. That question popped into my mind. Okay.
So one of the things I found in some of the initial language in the budget, I came across a paragraph that really warmed my heart. It's just sounded like something you would see written in the founding area or maybe from the Federalist Papers. And I want to read this paragraph to you. It said, "The federal government was envisioned by the founders to be one of limited powers, protecting the unalienable rights of individuals, However, over the past century, the size and scope of the federal government has overrun these constitutional guardrails. Today, there are more than 2 million federal civilian employees and more who are paid with millions more who are paid entirely by government contracts and grants. So I just love those words of, limited powers, and that could be a convention of states authorizing document right there. The way that spending has increased, and just that sheer scope of size of the federal government of 2 million civilian employees. That's not counting military. 2 million civilian employees, and then millions more through contractors.
I know. Amazing.
That is out of control.
Yeah.
Now, there were some tenets laid out, which, again, these made sense. The whole introduction sounds good, but I'm sure the devil's in the details. But the document goes on and says there are universal tenets on which broad bipartisan action to reduce spending could be based. And it gives 6 of them. The first is government programs should have a direct, clear, immediate purpose and not duplicate other programs. That makes sense. Everybody would be for that. The second one is all federal spending should provide a necessary public service and serve a clear national interest. That sounds good too.
Yeah.
The third, all spending should fund its intended purpose and reach its intended recipient. They're 3 for 3 with me now. Fourth, the government should be frugal and strive to avoid overpaying for items. That's a great principle.
Yeah.
Fifth, the federal government should spend only the amount necessary to achieve the intended goals. And then sixth, each dollar spent should be measured by its effect on actual outcomes. So you can't argue with any of those, right?
No.
When I went through that list, I thought, well, wait a minute. They're missing probably the most important tenet or principle, and that is all spending should be constitutionally authorized. And in fact, I think that should be tenet number 1. But for some reason, they missed that.
So you're throwing that in as the 7th spending.
Right.
Tenet, right. Okay.
Right.
All right. Very good. Very good. Okay. Well, let's get then to now that Paul's kind of laid the groundwork for us here on the president's proposal. Let's get into what it actually looks like. And I'm going to bring this up. And Paul, you can still hear us, right?
Oh, yeah.
All right. Let me see if I can get this a little larger here so that we can see it. Hopefully that's visible now. Well, as with any budget proposal, there has to be some assumptions made as to economic growth, okay? And I'll tell you, every budget proposal that I've ever seen during my lifetime, every presidential budget proposal, the proposal seems to be somewhat optimistic, should we say, on economic growth. Well, I think the same thing has occurred here with the president's budget proposal. You can see here in the red, the president's budget proposal calls for a 2.8% economic growth. Okay, so and what you see here are all the other projections from various other sources in our economy and country, banks and so forth, their projection for economic growth. And as you can see, the president's projection is, of course, better than all the other projections. Who knows? I don't know. It just seems to me that we're certainly on a path for tremendous economic growth under our current time. So is the 2.8% realistic? I don't know, but it's certainly it appears to be overly optimistic compared to other sources that are involved in projections. Well, yes, there's a spending cuts of 4.4 trillion, and according to the president's budget proposal, puts us on the path to balance the budget. Well, as you can see here, the projections, which are the bars here, the president's projection has the deficit down to 0.7% of GDP by 2030, the next 10 years. Well, the other projections show that in fact, that the deficits will in fact be much larger. So, what, Paul?
Dale, I wanted to interject here when we were discussing this. You know, it's interesting that this is typical of presidential budgets, both Republicans and Democrats.
Yes.
They project on a 10-year time frame, and when they're projecting cuts and getting the deficit down, usually that's all back-end loaded after the president proposing the budget is out of office.
Right. Which and of course, as we know, every Congress is different. As we know, if new administrations come in and they can change everything. So these projections out for 10 years really don't mean very much at all. So as far as the debt held by public debt held by as a percent of GDP, of course, the blue line here, the bottom line, shows in the president's budget that by 2030 that should be 66%. Well, the other projections out there show that the percentage of GDP it's going to even increase more, and of course one is showing that will be as much as 98% of GDP. So completely opposite to what the president's budget proposal is projecting. And some other areas of note: reducing the federal bureaucracy, 1.9 trillion cuts to non-defense programs, prioritizing the national defense, 740 billion, which was approved in the Budget Act. I think that's supposed to be 2019. Okay. One of the major areas lacking in the president's budget proposal is the addressing of entitlement spending. This is going to be the topic that Paul and I are going to take on for our March 9th broadcast, and that's to get a better understanding of entitlement spending. I think everyone understands, anyone that has tried to understand the budget proposal process in our country, the deficits, the national debt, the spending issues that we have in our country, in our federal government, has had to come to the conclusion or the observation that we're not going to be able to address these issues without entitlement spending, without tackling entitlement spending. The entitlement spending comprises something like 60 to 70% of our national budget. So we're not going to make any headway on this issue until those get addressed, that area gets addressed. So Paul and I are going to talk about this, like I said, on our March 9th broadcast. But here's a chart showing, of course, the direction of the entitlement spending, how it's going to go up. And that's mandatory spending, I might mention. there's a difference between mandatory spending and discretionary spending. So mandatory spending is by law. So that spending has to occur unless the law is changed. So anyway, we'll get into that more on March 9th. A couple other areas that are kind of lacking. That was the extension of the tax cuts, the maintaining of the corporate tax cuts, and a couple other areas there that I mentioned. But like I said, next Monday evening, Paul and I will address entitlement spending, which is a key to controlling spending in our country and addressing the national debt. So that's all we have for you on that. Paul, you got anything you want to add to what we've mentioned tonight?
No, but I look forward to tackling entitlement spending next week. That'll be a big project.
I might mention that we have on our YouTube channel, COS Indiana, we have some narrated PowerPoints on there, and there's some PowerPoint presentations that dealing with the federal budget and breakdown of the budget, entitlement spending, but they're somewhat outdated. They're a few years old, but some of the concepts are certainly true. Now, Paul, we've got your podcasts on there as well. Do you have any podcasts that get into any of this on the budget?
Off the top of my head, not specifically on entitlement spending, but there certainly is some material on deficit and getting some fiscal restraints in place.
Okay. All right. Good. Okay. Well, Paul, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
You're welcome.
And we'll see you again next Monday evening.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, Paul, thank you very much for joining us, bud. Always appreciate having Paul on to help us go through this. So I'm going to bring up my PowerPoint and get through some of the areas here. We're going to kind of skim through since we're kind of running short on time. And I want to implement here the slideshow option here so that you can easily see it, and your screen it'll occupy the major part of your screen there. I want to mention some of the resources that we have available to us here in Indiana and nationally as far as that's concerned. But here in Indiana, the main resource that we utilize a great deal is our national website, conventionofstates.com. And this is if you're looking to get involved in Convention of States here in Indiana or wherever you live, whatever state you live, you need to first go to this national website and open an account and sign the petition. That gets you logged in as a supporter of Convention of States. And that will then trigger some further contact. Now, embedded in the national website, we have our state website page, conventionofstates.com/Indiana, kind of a more focused look at what's going on here in Indiana. Social media platforms, Facebook is probably the main platform that we use. As a matter of fact, this broadcast is coming to you tonight through our state Facebook page, Convention of States Indiana. YouTube channel, COS Indiana. I mentioned this earlier. We have a YouTube channel, very much an educational resource for you. We have recordings of our broadcasts. We have narrated PowerPoint presentations, and Paul's podcasts. We have links to all of his podcasts, and Paul does a great podcast called the Free to Be Free podcast. And he's done quite a few of these, and they're very, very, very good, very educational. So I encourage you to take advantage of those. We're also on Twitter, #COS Indiana, Instagram, Convention of States Indiana, LinkedIn, and a number of other platforms. So if you're into social media, you should not have any problem finding us out there, because we're on a number of different platforms. Give me a little idea of what's going on here, what has been going on in our state with supporters. In 2019, we surpassed 41,000 supporters here in Indiana. We've been growing tremendously every year, and we are continuing to grow. Our goal for 2020 is to reach 52,000 supporters. And so far through February, we are well on track to reach this goal. So 52,000, that's what we're shooting for here in 2020. About 2,900 volunteers, people that have indicated a willingness to help out. We have about 40 individuals in leadership roles. Now, this is very important. If you are looking to get more involved in Convention of States, which I hope you are, the very first thing we want you to do is go to that national website, conventionofstates.com. Click on the menu selection, Take Action. Scroll down to the area where it says Become a Leader. Look at the different leadership, the volunteer leadership opportunities we have available here in the state, and read about them. If there's one of particular interest to you, open it up, read some more. Go ahead and make application. You're not obligated in any way. But what that does is your name then comes up on a report, and one of us will then be in contact with you to talk to you further about that particular position. So I encourage you, once again, I encourage you to look at becoming a leader. Definitely become a supporter here of Convention of States by just going to the website and opening an account. But consider being a leader, because we certainly need leaders in our state. Well, as I said, time permitting, we're running short on time, so I'm going to forego the basics of Convention of States. If you look at any previous recordings of our broadcast, you'll see this section where we discuss this, and certainly you'll find this on our national website. The Convention of States Basics, the problem that we see, what is our solution, and the plan. So we won't go into that this evening due to time. So please take a look at those areas for us. And okay, we've got some people that have checked in with us this evening, and I want to recognize those. Lydia Gonzalez, this is actually Melba Kaiser. She is one of our district captains, so she's checking in and saying hello to us. Thank you, Melba, for joining us this evening. Susan Lyon. Susan is going to be doing our state newsletter. So, and she's off to a very good start. And so she's saying hi to us. Okay. And Richard is one of our region captains. And Richard lives up in the Plymouth area. So Richard is saying hello to us. And so thanks, Richard, for tuning in tonight. And I guess Melba's got another comment here. So Congress is failing in all 6 tenets, referring to Paul's the 6 budget tenets that Paul mentioned. Yeah, I think you're right, Melba. I think you're right. This gentleman, Matthew Zale from Scranton, Pennsylvania. Thank you, Matthew, for joining us tonight. I really appreciate you coming in. Obviously, we're Indiana, and we're focused on getting more Hoosiers to watch our broadcast and join us. But we're certainly open to anyone across anywhere in the country. So thank you for joining us tonight, Matthew. Thank you, and hope you come back again. All right. Okay, folks. Very, very good. Well, I want to go ahead and wrap things up this evening. And just also want to mention again, now our next broadcast, which will be March 9th, where Paul and I will be talking about the entitlement spending, that part of the budget process that that must be addressed in order to get spending and bring it under control. Well, let's wrap things up. I always like to wrap up the broadcast with my favorite quote, and this is from our president and co-founder of Convention of States, Mark Meckler. And Mark says, you know, that there's a fundamental question facing our country, and that question is not what should we do. The question is who will decide. And yes, the question facing us is a two-word question. Very simply, who decides? And we believe that we, the people, should have a greater say-so in making the decisions of our federal government. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, if you're interested at all in joining in to Convention of States, our movement is we are moving along at a fast pace. We didn't have a chance to talk about this. I generally mention this and when I get into the basics of Convention of States, but we need to get 34 states to sign on to the resolution to make this Convention of States happen. We have 15 states right now, so we're working hard to get to that 34 state mark. Now, Indiana is one of the 15 states. We were the 6th state to sign on to holding a Convention of States. So if you have any desire to get more involved in our movement, we would certainly like to have you come in. And you know, it's early in the year. If this was a New Year's resolution that you had to get more involved in Convention of States, now's the time to do it. So I just want to, once again, I want to encourage you to go to our national website, conventionofstates.com, check us out. All right. If nothing else, sign up, open an account, become a supporter. Well, folks, I want to say good night to everyone. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. I want to wrap up one more. I want to give you one more piece of information that I think is very important. We've been doing this broadcast for over a year now, and I track our progress on this broadcast. You know, how many people we reach, how many viewers we get, and we have started off in 2020 very, very good. And I just want to tell you that our broadcast from February 17th was, from February 24th was a record broadcast. That was an all-time record as far as people reached and people viewing. So we are doing great. Our broadcast is becoming more and more successful. So I want to thank you again for supporting us like you have, and I hope we can depend upon your continued support. That's it for this evening. Thank you very much, folks, for joining us. Look forward to seeing you next Monday, 7 p.m. Thank you. Good night, everyone.